Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 6-game Major League Baseball slate. It does say 7, but the Toronto-Chicago White Sox game does not count. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, make sure to check the links in the description below for Discord and for YouTube membership. With that said, let's get into it. So, for the weather, we do have a concern with the Kansas City-Cleveland game, so do keep that in mind, and we'll have to check back later to make sure that game's good to go. Check with Kevin Roth on Twitter to get weather updates throughout the slate. Before I get into our pitchers, though, I will be doing DraftKings and FanDuel in this video, so do keep that in mind. So let's go and get into DraftKings here. So for my pitchers, we'll start with Eovaldi for Texas. He's only been under 15 fantasy points 2 times all season long. His ceiling is pretty good, and he's got an 18 to 22 fantasy point game in order here. I think he's a solid play, but in a tough matchup. It's not the most ideal situation on the slate, but it is a decent one. His K rate does keep him from being a top tier option most games, but he is got good opportunity to have over 20 fantasy points here. I will note that I do like a couple Boston plays on this slate, but there's only a couple. Maybe into their second option, George Kirby for Seattle. He's a little bit less safe than Eovaldi, but he's also in a tough situation against Houston. He has had about as much upside as anyone on the slate, though, so he is worth a look. That said, his floor and K rate aren't ideal, but he does have some utility. Julio Urias for the Dodgers is in play. He's only had 2 games in the past 7 games, though he's facing Pittsburgh and scored a few games ago and scored 5 fantasy points. That said, he has as much upside as anyone on the slate when his strikeouts are going, which they haven't been in that stretch, but he's avoidable, but the matchup is one of the better on the slate, so he's a contrarian option. Then we'll look at Tanner Bibby for Cleveland. If you remove his 2 really bad games for San Diego and Detroit, he's been decent most of the season with limited earned runs against. The downside is his K rate, which is very inconsistent, but he is in play here on this slate due to the fact he's facing Kansas City. And then Kyle Bradish for Baltimore is facing the Yankees in a tough matchup, but he is pitching well. He's only given up a few earned runs per game most of the season. He's one start versus the Yankees, was only 3.5 fantasy points, but he's easier lineup to face this time around. And he's had 4 20 fantasy point games in the last 5 starts, so I do think he's in play, but pitching is pretty rough today, so it's going to be high risk, high reward, but yeah, that's what we got. Maybe in our catchers here, we'll start with Adley Rutschman and Will Smith. They both draw some really good upside here. Adley is averaging 7.5 fantasy points a game for the last 10, and he's been pretty solid recently, so I do think he draws some really good upside here. He's also got some good home run potential here. Will Smith doesn't quite have the home run upside today that he normally does, but he's also just as good as Adley has been over the last 10. However, his batting average has been weaker. He is in play, but he's higher risk than Adley Rutschman is. And then Cal Raleigh is our value play for Seattle. He draws really good metrics for this game. He's hitting the ball about how he's hit all season long. He's not averaging a ton of fantasy points per game, but when he does manage to score fantasy points, he usually pays off okay, but that's the issue, is that sometimes he doesn't. However, he does have some good utility and home run potential in this game. You could also consider Jonah Heim and Francisco Alvarez here. Then we'll look at first base here, and we're going to start with, We're going to start with Nathaniel Lowe here for Texas. I really do like Texas stacks today, and he's definitely a top-tier option here. He has been improving recently. He's averaging 7 fantasy points a game for the last 10, but he does draw some good home run upside in this game, and he's not too expensive. He's borderline hard to roster, but then we'll look at Justin Turner for Boston. Now, he is facing Eovaldi, who I do like today, but his last, recent play has really propelled him, and so he does draw really good metrics for this game, and he's fairly priced. If anybody's going to get to Eovaldi, he's likely going to be the best option on this team. He's also hitting the ball very well lately, and he's had only 1 game without a hit in the about last 15 games, so I do like his upside there. Ty France is in play if he plays today. I'm not sure that he's going to play. It looks like he may miss another game, but if he does draw the start, he'll have some utility here, as he's played fairly well throughout the season. He has been somewhat inconsistent recently, but he draws some good potential here today if he plays. And then Josh Bell is a very good value kind of Hail Mary play here for Cleveland. He has been inconsistent throughout the season, but he has home run upside in this matchup, and so that's why I like him here. You could also consider Freddie Freeman, Christian Walker, Pete Alonso, and Anthony Rizzo at this position. Moving to second base, we'll start with Marcus Semien for Texas. Now, he has a good matchup here against Boston. I really like Texas a lot, though he is fairly expensive. His nearly 9 fantasy point per game over the last 10 does help him a little bit, though we do want him to hit a home run at this price point. Mookie Betts is also in play here. However, his price point makes him extremely hard to roster, but he can be at second or outfield today, and he has hit the ball extremely well recently with lots of home runs as well, so I do like his potential here. He's averaging almost 17 fantasy points a game over the last 10, which really gives him a lot of upside, though he does need a home run to pay off here. But I also really like Andres Gimenez today for Cleveland. He's not a huge home run hitter, but he's been absolutely mashing the ball well lately, averaging nearly 300 average over the last 10 or so games, and he's averaging almost 10 fantasy points a game in that stretch. He's had some really good games, and he's not even doesn't need a home run necessarily to do that either, so that's even better. He's just playing really solidly, and he's a great value play and core play for the slate at a pretty good price. You could also consider Ketel Marte, Jeff McNeil, and Geraldo Perdomo at this position. Moving to third base, we'll look at Jose Ramirez for Cleveland. Now, he's got a great matchup here against Kansas City. I really like his upside, though he has been a little bit slumpy in the batting average aspect the last few games, but he does have home run potential here, and he draws good metrics. Josh Jung is kind of a contrarian option today. He's a little bit pricey for what he's likely to do today, but he's hitting the ball pretty well, and he draws some good potential. He just doesn't have the home run metrics he normally does, but he is viable on the slate. And then Eugenio Suarez for Seattle is also in play. High risk, high reward play here. But he has been improving recently, which is giving him some upside. And he's also had 2 home runs the last 10 games. He's high risk but high reward here. You could also consider Gunnar Henderson, Rafael Devers, and Max Muncy here. Third base is probably the weakest position when it comes to not having too many value plays. Moving to shortstop, we'll look at Corey Seager for Texas. Now, he draws some really great metrics here. He's been hitting the ball extremely well lately, and he's had a really good string of games. I really like his upside today and home run potential, and he was close to must play on the slate. I just really like his upside. Gunnar Henderson is also in play, though he's been streaky this season. He has been getting hits every game, but he's not getting a lot of fantasy points to go along with him unless he hits a home run. He's been striking out a lot. That's a concern here, but he is in play at this price. J.P. Crawford for Seattle is in play here. I really like his upside in this matchup. He's been hitting the ball well. He's averaging almost 10 fantasy points a game for the last 10, and he's hitting really solidly, which is definitely a huge advantage here, and he's very cheap, which helps a lot as well. And Ahmad Rosario is a good option. If you go with a Cleveland stack, he's been hitting the ball extremely well recently. He doesn't have any home run potential really, but he does draw good metrics here and has good upside, though he, with Crawford being available at Seattle, he's not nearly a must-play, but he's a decent option and a contrarian off of Crawford. You could also consider Francisco Lindor and Geraldo Perdomo at this position. Moving into the outfielders, we're going to start with our 4 core plays, top plays rather, and Adolis Garcia, Mookie Betts, Corbin Carroll, and Julio Rodriguez. So we'll start with Garcia here for Texas. Now, he draws some really good metrics here. He has hit the ball really well lately, having lots of home run upside and good potential here. I really like his upside in this matchup against Boston, and he draws some fantastic home run upside. Obviously, I already talked about Mookie Betts, but he can play here, and he's probably a better fit in outfield if you can fit him in. Then we'll look at Corbin Carroll, who is a core play today for Arizona. He's hit the ball pretty solidly throughout the season. The metrics today are just off the charts. He did hit a home run a couple of days ago after having a couple rough games, but most of his games lately have been pretty solid when he starts, so I do like his upside. And he has nice home run potential. And then Julio Rodriguez doesn't have the home run upside today that some of the other guys do, but he's hitting the ball really well at a 300 clip, and I do like his hitting generally, so Seattle is kind of a sneaky team today against Houston, and he definitely draws some good metrics, though he is fairly expensive and hard to roster as a result. Then we'll get in some value plays at this position, and Brandon Nimmo, he has really just expanded how he's hitting lately. He's not hitting the ball as good as he was, but he's hitting more home runs. And that does give him some utility here, though his price has come up a little bit, which is a little bit concerning. Then Duran for Texas. He is a core play for me today, as he's hit the ball very well all season long. Now, he's had a string of a few games where he was bad, but he has great potential here, and he's still averaging 8.5 fantasy points a game over the last 10. Then we'll look at Stephen Kwan for Cleveland. He's a little bit pricey for the fact that he doesn't really have a lot of home run upside, but he's hit the ball really well recently, and that does give him some nice utility here. He's also hitting the ball over 300 for the last 10, so that gives him an advantage. Anthony Santander for Baltimore is facing a tougher matchup here for Baltimore against the Yankees, but he does hit home runs a lot, and he has nice home run potential in this one. I don't always like him, but occasionally he has a specific situation where he just draws really good metrics, and this is one of them. Then we'll look at Duran for Boston. Now, I don't love him because he's got a tough matchup against Eovaldi, but he's hit the ball extremely well when he's played, and I do like his potential here. He seems like that he's just hitting the ball extremely well. He's also hit Texas well in the past, and he's got a 400 batting average over the last 10 games, which is hard to ignore. Then we'll look at Toscar Hernandez for Seattle. He has just hit the ball extremely impressively lately, and I like his potential here. He's improving his fantasy points per game over the last 10, which is an advantage here. He also has a nice home run upside. And then Tommy Pham is somebody that's been hard to ignore recently, as he's just hitting a ridiculous 410 over the last 10 games. He's also just scoring a lot of fantasy points as a result of that. Even without a ton of home runs, he's still managing to crush the ball and score fantasy points. And then Leody Taveras for Texas is in play today as well. He's a nice cheap option here. And he is hitting the ball pretty solidly lately, hitting at a 351 average, which is really nice. Also averaging almost 10 fantasy points a game. He also has nice home run potential here. And Texas is definitely a really good team to potentially stack here. And I also like the outfielder Cowser for Baltimore. I did want to mention him as well. He is kind of a Hail Mary play, but he started yesterday and did a pretty good game. And having him in Yankee Stadium is definitely in play on the slate. So with that said, let's go ahead and get over to FanDuel here, and I will start with my pitchers. For FanDuel, Eovaldi is the top overall option, BB is a secondary option, and then Bradish is kind of the value play. There's not a ton of cheap options available, unfortunately, at this position, so those are the guys I like the best, though. At first base, or catcher, we can go with Freddie Freeman as the expensive play, but Nate Lowe and Christian Walker are both underpriced, and so I do think they are top-tier options at this position. And then Adley Rutschman is a contrarian option if you want to go with a catcher. At second base, Marcus Semien, Mookie Betts, both are pretty expensive here, but they are both viable here. I do really like Ezekiel Duran, though, as he draws really good metrics, and he's a cheap option here. Ketel Marte is also in play, as well as Andres Gimenez, who's just completely underpriced. I wouldn't be upset with putting a guy like Duran or Marte or even Semien at second, and then put Andre Gimenez at the utility spot on this particular slate. Jose Ramirez is also in play today for third base, along with Josh Jung. They're a little bit pricey and somewhat hard to roster, but I do like Gunnar Henderson and Justin Turner, both as some good value plays, and Rafael Devers is a contrarian play as well. There's not a lot of value at this position in general, so Gunnar Henderson or Josh Jung or Jose Ramirez are all definitely in play here. Moving to the shortstop, we're going to look at Corey Seager and Mookie Betts first, as well as Gunnar Henderson, who I already mentioned, but Francisco Lindor and Ezekiel Duran can also play at this position, and both those guys have some nice utility for the slate. Moving on to our outfielders, Adolis Garcia is a little bit underpriced here on FanDuel, so he's definitely viable here. Mookie Betts and Corbin Carroll are also in play, though they are fairly expensive. Brandon Nimmo and Julio Rodriguez are a little pricey, but they have good utility on the slate. Ezekiel Duran can also play this position. He's available a lot of different positions today. Masataka Yoshida is underpriced, though, in a tough matchup. Stephen Kwan is definitely viable at this price point. Anthony Santander and Cedric Mullins are both around the same price and have some utility here, though I don't love Baltimore today. And then Jarren Duran and Tommy Pham are both value plays that have really nice upside here. You could also look at Colton Cowser on this slate as well. I just didn't mention him here on this particular video because there's just so many good options in the outfield. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.